All right, so in this video, we're going to discuss the use of the TC remote interface. So up to this point, the assumption is that you've got your devices installed in the field. They've been provisioned to your account. You've got your account information, your introductory email from TraffiCalm at the time of shipment. And now we're ready to log in into the interface. So like I said, you've likely received an email that says or to your primary account, here's your temporary password. Once you receive that, you go and navigate on any laptop, PC, phone, whatever, to tc remote.trafficalm.com. So once you've got your login email or your introductory email, you've been given a temporary password to an account that you've identified for us to associate the super admin privileges to on the TC Remote website. So once you get that email, you can navigate over on really any internet connected device on any browser to tc-remote.trafficcalm.com. Obviously, the best thing you can do is be on like a PC on Safari or Chrome or Edge, but really anything will work. It's all just web based and all of our devices are. It's all just web based, and all of our. It's all just web based and hosted on Amazon Web Server, so you can access it from any device. Once you've gone to tc-remote.trafficcalm.com, you'll be confronted with a login screen. Just type in your credentials here, even if it's that temporary password. You won't see it here in this video, but you'll be followed up with asking for a permanent password, which is what we've done here, and created that permanent password so that you can log in and see your devices. So once you click login, the first thing it opens is the primary screen, which is basically just a display of your available devices. In this instance, we have 4 connected. Now you notice over here on the left-hand side, we also have 4 devices identified. And that's just another way of viewing those devices. So this conflict intersection number 1 is going to pop over. If I click on that, it's going to pop over to this device in the upper left corner. So let's do that. There we go. So once you click on a device, whether it's on the map or over here on the side menu, it's going to expand some quick view options for that device, essentially just giving you a snapshot of what's going on with it at the current moment or within the most recent poll from the device. Just to note, all TC remote connected devices are polled every 15 minutes for their data feed. So real time in this instance is actually a 15-minute interval. Whether this data is 1 minute old or 15 minutes old, we don't necessarily publish that here on the screen. We can view it later in the status window, but do know that it may be up to 15 minutes old. So you'll notice here, this one's got a battery voltage of 13.3 volts. It's using 114 milliamps of power to operate. The solar panel voltage is currently at a half a volt, so not pulling any power at all from the sun. And the currently experienced temperature inside the cabinet, whatever that may be, is 24.4 C. I can close this just by clicking the small X and zoom out to the window. Now you'll notice this is actually a global map. So when it first launches, I'll refresh the screen here. When it first launches, it snaps to the widest available devices. So if you have a device in San Francisco and you have another device on Long Island in New York, it's going to show the whole of the United States, more or less. Whereas in this instance, this is near TraffiCalm headquarters here. So we've set these devices up locally, and that's where they are around us. And those are the only devices connected to this TC remote account. So let's get into what you can actually do with these devices, though. Let's click on this Spencer Street device. It's a push-to-cross system. You'll notice it's got a push-to-cross icon. So when we were out in the field and we set this device up, we told it what kind of system it is. That feeds all the way through to TC Remote. All those settings carry through. And so what gets visualized here is that it is a push-to-cross system or a pedestrian crossing system. And we'll see here in a minute, we can pull from it like how many other collaborators are connected to that controller and what are their current variables that are displayed. But first, let's get into the configuration changes you can make to this system. So if I click this wrench icon here, that's going to expand the configuration of the device. Now, if you have If I click this wrench icon here, that's going to open up the configuration options for the device. So if you've ever set up a system locally, this will look actually fairly familiar, or it'll read very familiar to you. The setup options and the way it's configured, or the configuration wizard, are very, very similar. And that's intentional. We don't want to change the appearance or the operation when you get to this point. So there's a lot of changes you can make here. One of those changes is not being able to change the system type. So you cannot go from a push to cross system to a conflict intersection warning system, or like um, a high water detection system. It is now going to be, once it's set up as a push to cross system in the field, you're going to have to go back out to the field to change the system type. So if you're monitoring your systems and you're like, that wasn't supposed to be pushed across, that was supposed to be an all flash system, you're going to send somebody out there to reset the system and start it up again and start over. But in this case, we did set it up as a push across, and that's intentional. So the first thing we're going to identify is a system name. Now, this hasn't been terribly important in the past when devices were not connected to a like TC remote or a cloud interface. But now that they are, it's important to designate those devices very individually, right? So that I know this device is at this part of town and this one's over on the highway over there across town. I can now name those things so that they show up in the map as a more recollectible name, especially as you start working through like your user group. Who knows where these things are supposed to be? Obviously, it's easy to see them on a map, but also naming them the appropriate thing will help your team navigate through multiple devices. TC Remote can host thousands of devices. So it gets more and more convoluted the more devices you add into the group. So we recommend you really nail down like a system name protocol and stick to it when you're naming your systems. Now you can change the names of the devices here remotely. So you have your tech set the system up in the field. They named it something that they were supposed to have named at that point, but you can go back in and change it at any time. Let's say your protocol does change and you decide on a better standard for naming your devices as your system grows or as your group of systems grow. You can change that out here. Clicking next will advance to the device type option. So we can tell it within its push to cross functionality, is it activated by an audible talking push button, a standard push button, or does it have a crosswalk illuminator? So most typically we're going to be setting up a standard push button system, but this changes power output slightly depending on what you select here. So usually not a remote application where you're going to be able to change this, but let's say this setting got missed in the initial setup and we were supposed to have set it up as an audible talking system. We could select to do so here. Now that would power on that audible talking device. You would start hearing, if you were on the roadside out there, the yellow lights are flashing message from that button almost immediately. So what's changed here at your desktop will take effect out on the roadway in a minute. It won't take immediate effect though. I didn't just change this out on the roadway. I've got to go all the way through my wizard and click the send to sign option to actually have it take effect. So let's go ahead and change it here. Again, this hasn't taken any effect. And even when I click next, that's still not sent out to that device out there. I've got to go all the way through the wizard. And you'll see there's a button progression down here. So I've been through 2 screens, which are now green. I'm currently on the 3rd screen, which is dark gray. And I have yet to reach these last 3 screens, which are light gray. Finally, we can select, but moving on, we can select an operating mode, whether it's input operated, 24/7 operated, daytime or nighttime operated. Let's say, for whatever reason, you've got an event going on in your downtown area, like a sports game or something, and you're like, let's just turn all of our push to cross systems on. You can go through and just set them to 24/7 operated. Now, push button or not, those systems are going to activate. Audible push button, whatever, they're going to be activated on a 24/7 basis. That's a quick way to just get visualization on the roadway that there's probably just constant pedestrian activity. Or there may be other instances where this is necessary, but right now we'll keep it to input operated, which is the standard like push the button to activate the signs feature. We can adjust the brightness remotely. So let's say we've got a system that has been reported as dying out, maybe in bad weather conditions, like 7-10 days of bad weather, and a specific system didn't make it through that. We can go in here, change out the brightness values, especially at the nighttime. This 10% brightness is actually considerably brighter than needs to be at nighttime. If you change this down to like 8 or 7%, now you're going to dim the sign down, or whatever connected device is hooked up to the controller and collaborators. It's going to dim those down and not have as much output or power requirement in the middle of the night when the solar panel's not generating any power, right? Likewise, you could reduce the daytime brightness. Usually these are defaulted to 110. We say recommended, but that's just what the default values are. You can really adjust these down in like a low power condition. Most of the time, though, these are going to be untouched. Automatic brightness adjustment. Just changes how fast the sign changes in brightness. And it could be, if you set it to aggressive, it could be perceptible to passerbys and a little bit of an awkward display. So we usually keep this at standard. Finally, we can set, or moving on, we can set up the flash pattern of the device. Usually in the instance of push across, you're going to have an RFB flash pattern, but we could turn it to the standard 60 flashes per minute flash pattern or whatever. Do know this is going to change, actual functionality on the roadway. So once you've selected something here, unless you know for a fact that you want it to change out on the roadway, you probably shouldn't mess with the flasher settings at all. Default settings are going to be for a push-to-cross system, 120 flashes per minute with an RRFB flash selected to alternating. So we have two outputs, and they alternate A to B, right? And this is consistent with MUTCD requirements for what an RFB flash pattern should look like. And we've evaluated that and been evaluated by several agencies to make sure that we are adhering to that RFB standard flash pattern. Finally, the hold time, this is really important, especially in a push-to-cross system. How long will the system stay activated for? Now, as you do traffic surveys or perhaps get feedback from the public, this value could increase or decrease. Knowing that the longer we hold the flash for, that's how long the system is going to flash for after a button gets pressed. The longer we hold the flash for, the more battery power we consume per flash, right? So I would not jam this up to the maximum value of 450 seconds. You'll notice here I've got like a little question mark just to note. I can hover over that and it'll pull up like some tool tips here that show me exactly what this value means, right? So usually we're going to give people 10 to 25 seconds to cross the street, depending on how many lanes there are and the general activity around the area. If you, like I said, if you really jam this number up, you give them 100 seconds to cross the road when it only takes them, in fact, like 15 seconds for the average walker or average pedestrian to walk across the road. We're utilizing way too much energy and way too much flash time on that system. But however, this does give an option to remotely change that value, which is really great, right? You don't have to go out to the roadside and try to change it there. You as an engineer or as a traffic manager can go in and change this value on the spot, on the fly. Clicking next, we'll be approached with the collaborator setup screen. So if you're familiar with our flashing sign system to the level where you know the discussion between controllers and collaborators, this is where we tell the controller on site that it has other collaborators that it's paired with. So it's radio communication to devices synced together. Now this is where TC Remote really, really shines. Is that not only am I setting up the controller's device, I'm also telling that controller to go to its collaborators and set them up as well. So I can set their settings here. It's making changes to those posts as well. So if you have a push-to-cross system is a perfect example. Generally speaking, you're going to have a post on one side of the street with a RFB and a sign and a push button. You'll have that mirrored on the other side of the street, and those two posts need to sync together. So they all flash at the same time. When you push a button on one side, the other side flashes, and likewise the other way. This becomes really exponentially important in that we don't have to go through each collaborator in our systems, right? We can go through this one controller, tunnel through to its collaborators and tell it, here's the settings that you need to set up to as well. This system's set up to have two collaborators, in fact, so maybe a middle of the street or a pedestrian island refuge would have a post with a second collaborator or a third post in that instance. On roundabouts, for instance, you may have as many as 8 posts that are illuminated. This system is perfectly suited to do that, and you would see all those options here listed in this collaborator setup. Now, in this view for a push-to-cross system, there's no options for specific collaborator functionality. It is just, it does what the controller does, right? They're identical posts. They look the same to the passerby, but they do exactly the same thing. So there is no alternate functionality for the individual collaborators. In different setup for different kinds of systems like a chevron or a curve warning system, you get to select what each collaborator does. In this one, it's just, I've told it has a collaborator or it has 2 collaborators, and they do the same thing the controller does. Once this is all done, now I'm going to click the submit button. This is the threshold where I've actually am sending stuff out to the field. So to minimize the interaction of our database or our server with the device out in the field, we've consolidated as much information into a single transmission as possible. So that's where now I've done all my settings. I've set everything I want to. I click the submit button. It is really recommended that you don't hit the submit button until you verify that you've done everything you want to do. Hitting the submit button opens that doorway, opens up the communication between devices, and one of the limitations of TC Remote is the amount of data that it can transfer. It's a robust system. It's actually very inexpensive for what it does, but we have built it under the parameters of very low data usage. So you want to be considerate of how much data you're using or how much you're requiring of the system. And this submit button is one where if you just jam on this button 100,000 times, you're going to blow through your data cap and the system is going to be inaccessible for 30 days or till the end of the month billing period, end of the billing period until that point. So do want to be cognizant of like hitting that submit button opens that doorway. Try to open that door as few times as possible through any given month. We understand like during the initial setup, you may want to make changes to a system over and over again, but as you get that system settled into its operation, you should never have to hit that submit button. One more thing that is tied to that submit button is this advanced settings screen. So we went through the general configuration of the device. We can also click over to the advanced settings tab. It does not have its own submit button at the bottom. It is tied to that previous one. But you can select various advanced parameters of the devices. So a big one is telling it what kind of battery it has. This is generally set at the factory to the right selection, but it could be that someone accidentally changed it or didn't quite understand what these various chemistries meant. We won't get into the details of what they are and which options are available, but just know that they do have to be set to the right value. We can also program different things like a big one is the input 2. So there's 2 inputs on any given controller or collaborator, input 1 and input 2. Input 2 actually has advanced functionality. That's where we tell it here. It's either an input, just like if you plug a button into it, it turns the system on. A reset trigger, so if you plug a button into it, it reactivates the Wi-Fi, but it won't light the flashing signs up at all. Or if it's an external light sensor. By default, it's set to a reset trigger. Now, we've seen a lot in the field. People set this to, or they plug the device into input 2, and this is set to reset trigger, so it's not doing anything other than reactivating their Wi-Fi. We could go in if that mistake was made, rather than having to go swap a bunch of stuff out or get somebody out there in a bucket truck to change things out, we could just go in and change this to input mode. Now it would operate the way that was expected, right? There's several other settings, like if there's a radar connected, all the radar sensitivity settings, diagnostic LEDs, a lot of the things that really are device contingent or situational are set here. Once I have these settings set the way I want, I have to go back to the configuration and click that submit button on the final page. If I am on the first page, I'll just show it here because this could be a point of confusion. If I'm on the first page for the configuration and I jump over to advanced settings, and I set my settings and I go back to configuration, you'll notice it is still on that first frame of the configuration. So I would have to just needlessly go through the end here to click that submit button. All right, so that's the basic configuration tool. That's how we would work through a device that's already been set up but needs some refinement. And again, these features become more and more expanded as we delve into other device types or other system types. This was just exclusively pushed across. But let's go back through. I will note that unless I click that submit button, if I try to navigate off this page in any way, if I try to go to Amazon or some, like Reddit or something off of this page, it's not going to navigate to that. It's going to tell me, it's going to give me a warning. So within TC Remote, if I try to click my map button, it's going to warn me that I haven't sent those changes to the sign because I never actually clicked the submit button. I have to tangibly choose whether I want to cancel, which closes this pop-up and brings you back to where you were, like that. Or I have to click the leave button. So if I click leave, it didn't send those settings. It's not going to have saved them to the sign. If you had thought they're saved to the sign and you go out and drive past the sign now and it doesn't do what you thought it would do, that's because you didn't click the submit button, right? And you just navigated off of it. So we try to prevent missed instances like that. Let's go down to the Chevron system. That'd be another great example of a setup. We'll just quickly go through the setup screens. Again, or setup frames, you got your system name or alias. You've got a selected operating mode. So this one, it knows it has radar connected, so you can select radar input operated. You can go through and tell it whether the controller device, again, we have controllers and collaborators. The controller in a curve warning system can be set up on a Chevron. or it could be set up on the curve ahead warning sign. So if it's on the chevron, you select yes here, and that will become part of the sequencing of the chevrons. Or if you click no, then it's assuming it's on a curve ahead sign, and it won't be part of the sequencing. Different parameters for different signs hooked up here. So we have our warning sign brightness in addition to our chevron sign brightness, so you can set those up individually. And all those options are here for setting up a curve warning system. Again, most of this is going to have been done in the field, but these are ways we can go in and refine it. I'm going to go back to the map view, and we'll delve into the scheduling of devices. So now certain device types can be scheduled, like this stop sign here, indicative of an all flash system. It's not necessarily a stop sign. It is just that we put a sign out there and we told it flashes 24/7 or on a radar or on a button, but we didn't designate like it's a push to cross system or a chevron system. It's just a generic, this stop sign just means it's a generic flashing sign. It could be a warning sign for like, alligator crossing or something like that. What I can do though, is I can select this little schedule icon over here, or I can click over into that device and I can click the schedule icon there. It's like a little calendar, right? If I click that, that brings me into a full scheduling utility. We'll do another video on how to set schedules up, but this allows us to see and visualize a schedule for that device. So basically just telling it to turn on and off during any given day period. It's especially useful in school zones where we change school behaviors or driver behavior during the school zone hours, right? It's fully accessible here. We can import and export schedule files. So if I have 50 devices I'm trying to manage, I don't have to go through and click these buttons individually 50 times. I can save, I can do it once, save it out using the export button, and then go through all my list of devices and import that schedule into each one of those. And sending the schedule is the switch, right? That's when we actually decide we're going to send information off to the device out there. So we're going to send a schedule off to it. And again, as few times as possible is what we recommend. There is a button here for instructions, so it helps you navigate through like what does all this stuff mean and what does it do. So hopefully that can help if you get a little bit lost. Back to the map, schedule button is accompanied with a reports button and a status button. What's cool about this here is this device can actually be turned on and off right here with this button. So I can turn the system, and all it does is just say, hey, start flashing. So if it's in on mode, the lights are flashing. If it's in off mode, the lights are not flashing. What's important though is if it has an input, a radar or a button or some other input device type, those are still going to activate the signage. We won't know in this interface if those are operating and activating the signs, and this does not kill that local functionality. All this does is say, I want the signs to flash regardless of what's going on out there, regardless of somebody pushing a button or a car driving at it, or I don't want the sign to flash until something local happens. So if you don't have any local input method, no radar, no button, no high water sensor, no ice sensor, this option here just turns the flashing off. So you can manually activate your signage. Consider like a chain up area at a snowy pass, right? And sometimes we flash signs at trucks and drivers that they have to put their chains on, right? So we can have an operator sitting here and have all the signs in any given pass. They can go through and click on and off on all those and make sure that they're flashing when they're supposed to be, and then turn them off when they're not supposed to be. So that is one really just quick access function we've built in there. Let's go into the status page here for this device. And you'll see a readout or a log of system information, not only for the controller, here we've highlighted the controller, but also for all the collaborators that are attached to it. So as we go through this, we'll see various parameters fed out, such as like system information. So what network is it on? Operating mode, basically what it is currently set to, and then what input 2 does for us. So this helps us kind of troubleshoot and find out if there's any issues with the system. We can really dive into these values and figure out if there's something going on out there. Power information is a big one. This one's not populated because it's kind of a dummy model. Let's go back and see if we can find one that is. All right, so I've clicked the status button and jumped away from the map into this specific group status. So this was that conflict intersection warning system. I'm sorry. This was that chevron or curve warning system. So now I'm seeing information for not only the controller, you'll see that labeled there, but also 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 collaborators attached to it. And there is a wealth of information here. You can analyze this till you're blue in the face, but there's some basic functionalities that help us basically troubleshoot a system that might be having an issue. Also, we've been able to preempt knowing about an issue. Like if we're going to wait for a phone call that says like this system's not operating out there, this is kind of that phone call, right? It lets us go in and see if there's anything happening that we're not aware of that maybe needs maintenance attention. So the first frame that opens up, and once you expand it for the controller, it expands for all the subsequent collaborators, you'll see. There's just a basic view. If anything is red in here, that's a point of concern, right? So mesh link quality is concerning the radio, the device-to-device communication has a low quality link between some devices. Now that is green on all the other collaborators, so that means that the controller is having a hard time reaching some collaborator. If I expand this system information, I can see mesh link quality between the controllers is it's sitting at these values. Now, on a maintenance standpoint, if you call us up and you're like, hey, I've got a warning here in red, mesh link quality poor, and you call us and say which one of these devices is suffering, we would say, well, which one of them it's sitting at a value above 70, right? So none of these are above 70. Usually we go like between 70 and 80 is kind of a warning point. Anything above 80 is probably not operational. That's just a measure of the link quality between the devices on their radio network. So that's what that means, but you'll see several other options like that. One of the big ones here is going to be power information. So seeing what the device is currently experiencing, like 11.5 volts, and what the solar panel voltage is at. So we know if I'm looking out the window and I see that it's very sunny, and this is not sitting at a very high value, let's say 15 or above, then something is obstructing my solar panel in this specific instance. If this battery is down below 12 volts, that indicates to me that it's in a low power state and it's probably not operating optimally out on the roadway. Here, like this system or this collaborator has 12.8 volts on its battery and 17.3 volts coming off its solar panel. This is all just dummy information in this one. You should not expect to see that of your devices out in the field. But if there is an issue, we can drive in here and see exactly what's going on with those specific devices. One final thing I'll note here in this view is the modem feedback. So on some systems, it'll show a last point of contact. It'll publish a date right here. I don't know why this dummy model is not doing that, but you'll see a last contact point. That's a date and time that says when the server was last able to access the device. Back to the map, there's one more view that we can pop over to, and that's the report. So we have that information that we just looked at in the status is also consolidated into a lengthy status log, so we can see a history of information from these devices. Again, they get pretty substantial, so it's not like you just click this button and it downloads in a couple seconds and you can pop it open in Excel. What's going to happen is you click this button and it is going to email off the report as an attachment to the logged in account. So let's get into what does it mean to be in a logged in account. So if you look up here, every window in the TC remote interface has this icon up here, it's a little person. And if you click that, it gives you a couple options, account and sign out. Now, obviously we don't want to sign out, but we could when we're done. Let's click over to account and see what's going on with our specific profile. So again, if I had just clicked that report send button, it's going to email that report to this email address. Now, this is the super admin email for this account. It's set up as a sandbox, we called it. It has no phone number entered, but if you wanted to get notifications from your system via SMS text message to your phone, then you would set up a phone number here. We can also set it up to send email notifications. We'll kind of get into in a second what that means. But this is the profile that I'm currently logged into. I can make changes to it. I can also go as a super admin, go add other users, right? So if I click this add button, it allows me to designate a specific person or email address or a new account to be a user in this group of devices. So let's say you are the Oklahoma DOT. you can have potentially hundreds of users in here in various areas managing devices across the state, right? So we can say, though, they're different user level types. So we have to designate a first name, last name, specific username, which is generally going to be their email address, their actual email address. Phone number is elective. You don't have to enter a phone number. But then we do have to select a user level for that specific user. So now an admin, the only breakdown here is that they can go add other users. An admin has permission to go add other users. A standard user can go in and make changes to devices, but they can't add new users. They can't make changes to existing users either. A view-only user can log in and just see the icons on the map and see their various parameters, like in the status screen, and download the reports. They can't go make changes to device settings. Seems like a pretty logical breakdown of user permissions there, right? Finally, we select what time zone they're in so that all the information on screen appears correctly. Time zone discussion is actually pretty critical here, especially for setting up schedules. So I'm in Idaho, and we have 2 time zones in our state. So if I'm in Boise and I'm setting up a system that's up in Sandpoint, Idaho, which is in the far northern part of the state, I have crossed a time zone. I'm in Mountain Standard Time Zone, and the device is in Pacific Time. The changes I send are going to appear on my screen as being in Mountain Time, or I'm setting them up as though they're in Mountain Time, like 2 p.m. I would schedule a change, right? Or I'd set a clock to 2 p.m. Back up in Sandpoint, it's going to send that device and convert those to local time zone operations. So if I tell it to turn on at 2 o'clock here in Mountain Standard Time, and I send that at what's actually 1 o'clock for the device up there, it's going to still take it as 2 o'clock. So it's not like I drop back an hour and say, well, at 2 o'clock, you told me to do something at 2 o'clock, but that was actually 1 o'clock my time. This is getting confusing, but know that the device itself is going to turn on at 2 o'clock. If I tell it to turn on at 2 o'clock, it's going to turn on at 2 o'clock, regardless of what time zone it's in. But we do want to operate in the correct visualization of that time zone, so that's where you select what you've got here. All right, moving on, we can change the password for the currently logged in profile. So again, you're issued a like a default or temporary password when you first set the system up or first log into the system. You can change that password as you go along. You will have to know the current password of the system, though. There is, however, a password reset feature at the beginning. So if I sign out here, go to the login screen, there is a password reset that will send a password request to your email address. Finally, I can select what type of account notifications I want. So there's only really 2 notifications the system can send over. That's if the system goes offline or if it's been knocked over. So a system offline, I could select either a text message if I have a phone number loaded in, an email message if I have an email loaded in, or both if I want to land a notification in both. The other's a tip over condition where we have a sensor on top of the post and somebody runs into that post at 45 degrees, it's going to send out a notification that says I've been knocked down. And so that's what you get here is a knockdown notification. Like they say here, you're going to have message and data rates apply. Notifications should be highly infrequent, right? They should be alarming if they come across either the sign's been knocked down or the power's gone offline. So in either case, something's going on that needs attention out there in the field. Back to the map screen, just close things out here. That is the totality of the TC remote interface. There is a contact us button, which will launch a screen where you can receive the contact information or view the contact information for your support group. Call us anytime, email us anytime. We are happy to help work through anything here in TC remote. If you do call in and there's something that you want us to see, we can do a screen share, or you can just give us your login information and the tech support team can log in and see the exact same view you've got, right? So that helps navigate through troubleshooting or potential questions you may have as they come up.